All right, guys, here again with Ben, and we are going to talk about Thomas Jefferson. So, third president of the United States. Um, there's a couple things that really didn't come up in the other two. I think we'll have to address, but we're going to try to go through. I think with each president, almost the same format. In other words, we'll leave some of the matters toward the end, like we've been doing, um, and because there's a lot going on in the Jefferson administration, right?
Right. Well, in 2 terms worth.
2 terms worth is correct. Adams, we had sort of a long talk, and it was only 1 term.
Right.
It was longer than
There's a lot going on in
Washington's.
that.
There's a lot
Oh,
going on in that term, but I think there's even more in Jefferson's term.
right.
Jefferson is one of these guys. Is like, for me, it makes me want to pull my hair out a little bit. Like on certain subjects,
I
like
have
we.
a book. I wanted to read it, but I didn't get a chance to do it yet. It's called The American Sphinx.
Mhm.
And that kind of epitomizes Jefferson. Like he's super intelligent, knows a lot of things, but at the end of the day, he's still an enigma.
Yeah, yeah, he certainly was. I mean,
He's one of my favorites. I'm not going to lie about that, but not for this reason.
that's right.
So,
Yeah, I have some. You know, I feel like he's one of my favorite founding fathers, or it may be the one, I guess. But it's not because of the things that's controversial. It's about
right,
the issues that are um, the mark that he left. I think
right.
was important. You know,
We
E-
wouldn't be who we are.
no, we certainly wouldn't.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of issues, right?
Yeah.
So I'll name the three big issues. So we're not getting to all of them yet. We'll have to back up a little bit, but religious ideas.
Right.
So sometimes makes you want to pull your hair out, not sure what he's thinking.
Right.
Okay. Well, and there's a lot of controversy about Jefferson, what he did, and Jefferson Bible. We'll talk about that too. But
Right.
uh, second thing is thinking specifically about slavery.
Yeah.
Uh, Also problematic, and then also good at the same time, which is sort of a hard. You're not sure what to do with him there. Um, and
I think he was not sure what to do with him there, and that's part of the problem.
that is part of the problem. And the relationship with the Native Americans and how some things were handled. Uh, and even for that matter, foreign affairs slash the the central bank and the problems with Hamilton's ideas and
Right.
that clash of political party, that really comes really crashing into this administration
Well,
because
the North, the South, Federalist, Anti-Federalist,
mhm,
dare I say, Union, Confederate.
yeah,
I mean, that's all beginning right here.
that's right.
Um, Jefferson is the epitome of those that would be states' rights,
Hmm.
and he's small government,
Hmm.
necessary evil, all that sort of thing. And his opponents, Hamilton, they would be, big government, uh,
That's right. Strong,
major
really
trade,
strong federal
banking.
government.
Right.
Yeah. Where Jefferson saw the United States more of he wanted an agrarian society, planters kind of
Right.
world. We can feed the world and expand upon property, and that those ideas
Right.
permeate. But he was really, I think, probably the most well read of any of
Right.
the presidents. He had, I think, they talk about like basically 3 libraries that he had.
Right.
Because the first one he had about 200 volumes, lost it in a fire.
Right.
Acquired another library, and then post-presidency, the British burned the Library of Congress.
Yep.
So he sells his private collection to the U.S. government to start their library, and I think at that point he had 6,500
Literally, the foundation of the library is
volumes.
his own library.
That's right. And then by the time of his death, which was only about 14 years later, he had another couple thousand books. In fact, he writes to Adams and he says, "I cannot live without books."
Right.
Like that's the
Probably
thing.
one of the richest dudes in debt.
I think it was. I think it was. So let's back up then and try to think about him from the beginning.
Well,
So
what was the third problem again?
the third problem, in my opinion, was the way that this all went down as far as the handling of the political
Okay.
party
Right.
issues that were, because he was, I think, just as staunchly opposed as they were for their views. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? And I think it fed the system a little bit.
Right.
You know, in that way, it almost exacerbated the problem. You know, so I'll give an example. The Federalists have uh, it's the Gazette, the something Gazette. I don't remember the name.
I mean,
Not,
I'm sure it's Boston Gazette or something to that
or I was
effect.
it was something like that.
National Gazette.
Yeah, or then and then he comes up with his own Gazette.
Right.
You know that.
Great name for these newspapers, right?
Yes, and they're just competing views, so that's just throwing one after the other kind of thing.
Right.
Like that kind of thing is happening, and you know this whole squabble that his administration starts off with, and you know the results of that. I don't know. It's the political machinery, I guess, is what I'm saying, along with the way that politics affected, say, Native Americans and foreign affairs. Like the combination of that, I think there's a there's arguments on both ends, I guess, is what I'm saying, of him, not whether he did the right thing or the wrong thing. You know, you
Right.
have people on both ends of that. You have both people on all ends of all these other spectrums too. But
Right.
anyway, so if we start at the beginning, he's raised in an Anglican church.
Right. He's Virginian. It makes sense.
He's in Virginia, so we're back to the same thing we had with Washington.
And going to probably have several presidents down the line.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. So he's raised there in an Anglican church. He becomes a vestryman, which means he was on a board making decisions for the church. So he was steeped in it. He was taught and baptized and all that in the Anglican church, and it was a part of that very much so. He ends up in law school, College of William and Mary.
I've actually been.
What's that?
I've actually been to those locations.
Yeah, the law school, College of William and Mary, and he begins a clerkship, and he's liked very much in that clerkship. And because of that, upon the death of the judge, he donated his library to Jefferson. So he started off on this interesting footing, you know, from the beginning. And he had already been studying Greek and French and Latin in addition to his English and legal studies. Right. So he was very well rounded.
He's pretty much a polyglot, kind of like John Quincy Adams later.
I think so.
Yeah.
So very, very much so. And then he goes on to start his legal practice. And what's interesting, and this is why it's going to come up, it's going to be important later, of why you want to pull your hair out with Jefferson. One of the cases that he picks up early is a case of slaves who don't want to go back. And he picks up their case, realizes they don't have any money, and he wants to do it for free, to allow them to remain free. And this goes to court. And this is prior to the Revolution, so this is still English law, right? And he appeals to the principle of natural law, that men deserve to be free. It is their right to be free. The judge disagreed.
In Virginia court.
That's right. So Jefferson loses the case, and then the way that we understand it, that at least that it's come down anyway, is that he promptly gives these men money, and then they disappear. They escape, and so people believe that he gave them money so that they could escape and not have to go back into slavery.
Where would they have gone in those days to be free?
No idea. So,
because there's no, even Canada wasn't an option yet.
That's right.
At that point.
That's correct. I would imagine that they went south and west.
Somewhere west. That would make sense.
Yeah, the other end of Georgia area, somewhere out in the...
Right. You know, when Oglethorpe founded Georgia, slavery was supposed to not be a part of that,
Hmm.
but within a year's time.
That's right. So, but we don't know. I mean, they could have melded into a Native American group somewhere or something. We don't know. They may have been picked up somewhere, but they just by someone else. We don't know. But supposedly he's trying to help them, and he's arguing in a court of law that slaves deserve to be free. All right.
So a firm anti-slavery position from the get-go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, this is early in his career. This is prior to the revolution and all that.
Right.
He's arguing that, and he states it a number of times. It takes up several cases that are involving these issues. And that's strange because of what we know about him later. That he ends up owning some 600 slaves
Right.
over his life. And
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, though. Some of those would have been similar to Washington in that he inherited all the custom
that's correct.
slaves with Martha.
That's correct.
Jefferson's wife, her dad was a known planter, right?
That's right.
Okay.
So, in fact, I think the majority came from his wife's side of the family,
right.
but he did get some from his own side too.
Right.
So we'll deal with the slavery topic again a little bit later because I just want to push into the.
Well, yeah,
to his
you
term.
can't help but come up to that.
You have to. Okay, just because it happened, then it sort of sets the stage for what you think is going to be like.
Well, in a way, he's the key figure in the whole thing. I mean,
yeah,
he tries to end it, but has it's twisted.
It is twisted, and that's the part that I'm talking about. It's one of the issues I'm talking about where it's just like I'm trying to pin him down, and you can't pin him down. And what happens with Missouri and everything else later,
right.
So I don't know, but nevertheless, he ends up in the in Virginia, right? In coming up through the political ranks, right?
In Williamsburg, right?
That's right.
Okay.
And you end up with him and Madison there, who are a force to be reckoned with in Virginia.
Yeah, they're probably the greatest political partnership we've seen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say until the Clintons, but I'm thinking that.
Yeah. Well, and then you have the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
Right. And so Jefferson's, I think, his ideas of natural law that I was talking about earlier end up in there.
Right.
Right. And the roots of that into the Constitution also, with the idea of us being endowed
and I think
with these rights.
I think the Constitution draws that from because Jefferson's not actually at that convention.
That's right.
I think the Constitution draws that from the Declaration.
He's not there, but he insists, even while he's not there, that certain things get done in the Constitution.
Right.
But he has this an interesting influence that happens to him, and it's a Baptist preacher, right, John Leland, who is in Virginia at this moment when all of this is going down. But Leland is born in Massachusetts.
Their first encounter would have been before or after he'd written the Declaration.
I'm very certain that it was after, but but at least the public ones that we know about.
Before we get into Leland, then let's talk about the Declaration for a minute,
Mm-hmm.
just as what it is as an American, but then also kind of like there's some, I guess, religious terms couched in it.
Mm-hmm.
And having recently watched the John Adams film, I guess first the question that we need to ask is, what's your take on Franklin, religious wise?
Benjamin Franklin? I don't know about Franklin either. He's also somewhat of an enigma to me. I don't think as much as Jefferson is. I feel like Franklin's. I don't know. How did they present him? I didn't see the series. Did they present him in a particular way there?
In the series, when they're debating the words of the Declaration, which Thomas Jefferson, every word was precisely chosen.
Yeah.
There's a point at which Franklin talks about some of the words that are being used, the word sacred and a couple
Mm-hmm.
other things, and he mentions that it smacks of the pulpit.
Mm-hmm.
And his reasoning behind it would be that you know we want this document to appeal to
To everybody.
everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I just was wondering if we see Franklin as a deist because
I think he's in that.
I think he
He's in
does
that spectrum.
tend to fall into that.
Yeah.
Um,
I think he and Benjamin Rush
and I'm thinking of that as an
and
influence
Franklin.
on Jefferson. Like,
Oh, no doubt.
because if you're looking at the wording of the Declaration prior to Franklin's influence,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of more. It's got some more religious overtones than it even has now.
Mm-hmm.
But it talks about inalienable rights that they're endowed by our Creator,
Mm-hmm.
and it mentions all these terms for God that don't quite.
Now, see, yeah. So that's yeah. He has these. The fact that those words are going to be used by Leland
Right,
also
right.
later. Yeah, they're not quite. I hear what you're saying. They're not. Franklin, you feel like was sort of arguing against the idea of having.
Well, he took out the word sacred, and there
Mhm,
was one other thing which would have made it more religious in nature.
mhm.
You know, making it more of the deist words that you would
That's right.
use.
But typical ones like like creator and words
Right,
like that. Sure. Yeah, I don't doubt that because, but I think Jefferson tried to be as wide open as he could be with regard to you know various different religious beliefs. I think politically, I don't think he wasn't very bendy at all.
and I think you're right. I think that um, just like Washington,
Hmm.
Washington would go around and hear these different sermons at different places.
Yeah.
Jefferson's absolutely doing that. I
Yes.
mean, that's where he encounters Leland
Sure.
probably for the
Sure. He
first time.
does. He would sit in on sermons and listen to them and all that. And again, he grew up in an Anglican church. He was a vestryman, so he had to
Right,
attend worship at some point, right? So he's doing that,
right,
and he has these various different encounters. But I think the real thing that causes the big stir is going to be what's still happening in the congregational churches.
right,
That's the impetus for the notion of religious freedom that we have in the First Amendment, for instance.
right.
Um, so I know. Is there anything else you want to say about the Declaration before we?
Well, and this is from Abraham Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember where I found this, but there was a great essay on it. Lincoln would
He
call
goes back to those words rather
right,
than the Constitution.
he would
That's right.
call the Declaration the apple of gold,
Mm-hmm.
surrounded by the silver lining of the Constitution, in that the Declaration is really the foundation of who we are as Americans, and the
Mm-hmm.
Constitution is the means by which we achieve uh,
Sure.
the Declaration.
I think that's how you interpret it, but I also feel like maybe Jefferson gets changed a little along the way in between the
I agree.
the Declaration and the
I mean, his time in France,
Constitution.
coupled with um,
The
the
Federalists.
negative views of his opponents
Mm-hmm.
about that,
Mm-hmm.
and just the antagonism that comes with the entire Hamilton versus Jefferson.
Yeah, who has the right to vote? Who
Right,
should? Who should lead us?
right,
Do they need to be educated? And all these sorts of different ideas
right.
about.
Jefferson's absolutely a man of the people in that
Yeah.
respect. I mean, he's the Democrat in the Republic.
Yeah. I think he walks back from it a little bit by the time we get to the Constitution. But I think Declaration is an expression of his real agenda as far as politically.
No
I do.
doubt.
I think that.
And I mean, Adams and Franklin had a bit of influence on it,
Hmm.
and then Congress later.
Hmm.
That you're right. We do have to say a few more things about the Declaration. So on the slavery issue,
Hmm.
unless you'd rather bring it up there, Jefferson's first draft has a line basically accusing King George of perpetuating slavery,
Hmm.
and then if it weren't for the king, we would be rid of it by now.
Yeah.
And that particular line, the Committee of Five actually takes that out before it even sees the Congress floor.
Hmm.
But Congress would have voted it out because the southern states wouldn't have stood for that. But
Yeah.
he was attempting to end slavery with the founding document.
That's right.
You know,
Yeah, they wanted to be silent on that issue.
they don't want to talk about slavery in the document, and not only that, they knew that it would get struck down anyway.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that Jefferson was already thinking that, when he says all men are created equal,
Yeah,
he
he meant
really
it.
means it.
He does mean it. Yeah. So he wanted to get rid of slavery. He's taking up the cause of slavery pro bono for people who are trying to be free.
Right.
He's expressing it in documents absolutely publicly. So it's obvious that he has that goal in mind
Right.
somewhere. It's just how to working that out. How that would work out, and he gets more influence in that regard too from some of the religious people that he talks to. You know, so uh, I think before we get into the Constitution, like this intervening period here is a time of when these various Congresses are meeting,
Right.
right? You've got Jefferson and Adams, again, running for office and doing their thing.
Right.
Well, you've got Leland there, who was extremely popular. And as I was saying, he was from Massachusetts. He grew up in a congregational church,
Right.
very fundamentalist congregational church that he'd walked away from and helped found a different church, a Baptist church in the region, and was baptized
You happen to know if
subsequently.
that was in Connecticut or not?
No, he ends up there
Okay.
later. Okay, so that there is this full circle here.
Right.
So he's in Massachusetts, then probably because of persecution, I don't know, but he ends up in Virginia.
Right.
Okay, and there's a Baptist church there where he's preaching. Jefferson has attended the church and heard from Leland, and they become acquainted. All right, and the reason why Jefferson becomes acquainted with him is because Leland becomes so very popular in this time period. He uh, Leland is in fact running for various different public offices and winning also as a preacher.
Right.
And
Not separating his church and state yet.
well, he's not. Well, but he's not. We'll talk about what he means by it. So, but
Right.
so he's rising up in political ranks too, and he hears word that we're going to have this Constitution, right? And he wants in that thing freedom of religion. He said, especially because of the state churches that are persecuting people.
Right.
He wants to get rid of established religion. There can be no established religion. Like that's the thing he keeps saying over and over again.
Right.
These established churches are a problem and a blight on the land.
And established meaning government funded.
That's correct.
Right.
And in fact, someone I think it may have been Adams that said it, but anyway, it was somebody else in this early group states that because he talks about getting rid of the state church, and he says that it would be easier to change the way the solar system moved than to remove
Sounds like Adams.
than to remove the Massachusetts church tax. Like that's how ingrained this is, right? So Leland ends up, writing a sermon entitled, the inalienable rights, right? And in fact, you can look this up and read it yourself. And it's an important piece of it's an important speech, I guess is the way I'm going to put it, because there's pieces of it that are about God, but it's extremely political,
right?
But it is about having the freedom to express oneself and to believe as one chooses, and you get the ideas of soul competency and all these sorts of ideas that are present there.
And soul competency is both a philosophical argument, a religious argument, and a political argument.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's kind of where we're getting into all those things, because it's all three.
That's it. That's right. And this kind of thing appeals to Jefferson, right? Because he is already by this point backed away from the doctrines of the church in which he grew up in,
Right.
where he stated he wasn't sure he believed any of those things anymore that the Anglican Church was teaching at the time. And that was difficult to express publicly, especially if you wanted to be in public office
Right.
or something. And
Yeah, because your wealthy backers are going to come from the
that's
Anglican
right.
Church.
And Leland expresses specifically about religious tests for office, that there should be none.
Right.
There can be no religious test for office. One thing doesn't have anything to do with the other. I mean, that this is a civil thing. This isn't a spiritual issue,
Right.
right? And so that partnered with the fact that once the Constitution is written, right, he goes and gives a speech actually, and tells the convention that he praises the Constitution because it says specifically there can be no religious test for office. He's like, that's one of the best lines in the whole thing,
Right.
you know. But it's not done yet. Okay, so
Yeah, it takes a while to ratify it.
that's right. It takes a while to ratify it, and the other part of it is that there needs to be amendments to this thing because there's no freedom of religion in here.
Right.
He said we need to be free, completely free in this way. So he tells them that here's the deal: if you don't add an amendment specifically saying that there can be freedom of religion
Right.
to this document, I'm going to run against you.
Right. Now that's Madison he's speaking to when he says
That's correct.
But yeah.
And I will win.
Right. Yeah, he's not wrong.
And he's not wrong. He would have won. He had the votes.
Right.
And Madison agreed to do it, so he backed up. He backed away.
Right.
You know.
Well, Madison's an interesting figure in that because he's our Federalist founding father,
mm-hmm.
and he such good friends with Jefferson that he leans over into that anti-federalist Democratic Republican
That's right.
side of things. He eventually becomes one himself.
That's right.
And he's the guy that proposes the 30 amendments that get put before Congress.
That's right.
So,
and under the pushing of urging of Jefferson.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
because Jefferson pioneers the religious statute through Virginia first, anyway,
mm-hmm.
And gets it passed in Virginia. And
that's right.
Madison's part of that as well.
That's right.
You know.
That's right. So they want this pushed out to be everywhere because of the problem of the Congregational Church. And I think someone like Leland would have known because he grew up in a Congregational church. He was Congregational, then becomes Baptist, realizes his views aren't tolerated. And it's after that the amendment is accepted that Leland moves back. Okay, he moves back to Massachusetts and then begins to help plant churches and organize them in Connecticut, creating the Danbury Baptist Association.
Right.
Okay. And therein will be the famous letter.
Right.
Right. That we know of, this wall of separation between the church and state.
The wilds of the state and the garden of the church.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right. And this pleased Leland very much.
Right. Some story about a wheel of cheese too, but I can't remember that
exactly. I have that too. That's during his administration.
Right.
So let's jump to that when we get to his administration. But I'm going to say a couple other things about what Leland says, and then we'll get to the cheese thing. That's 1 year into his presidency.
Right.
But Leland says this: the notion of a Christian commonwealth should be exploded forever. Government should protect every man in thinking and speaking freely, and see that one does not abuse another. The liberty I contend for is more than toleration. The very idea of toleration is despicable. It supposes that some have a preeminence above the rest to grant such an indulgence.
Right. That's
an interesting take. Whereas all should be equally free: Jews, Turks, pagans, and Christians. This is from John Leland, the Baptist preacher there. And why, by the way, why are these Baptists beginning to move out? Well, after the Great Awakening, Jonathan Edwards and all that, these kinds of things started happening. There was an explosion in a sense.
Those in the Congregational church that don't move toward Unitarianism move towards something that is more
more tolerable, I guess.
and tangible, I guess, because baptism by immersion, that's a visible sign where
That's right.
they've gotten away from that with christening and that sort of thing.
And he has another sermon entitled "Right of Conscience Inalienable," and in this he says, "Every man must give an account of himself to God, and therefore every man ought to be at liberty to serve God in a way he can best reconcile to his conscience. If government can answer for individuals at the day of judgment, let men be controlled by it in religious matters. Otherwise, let men be free." Which I think is a perfect summation of his notion of what it means
Right.
to have this kind of religious freedom. It was the government imposing religious ideas upon people.
Well, and the political freedom that we've been fighting for with this revolution and that
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing, it really is summed up in the First Amendment that you get to the Constitution. And the very first thing in the First Amendment is religion.
That's right.
It's first thing off the bat.
That's right.
There's a point that Leland is the reason for that.
That's right. And there was another important figure too, is Isaac Bacchus, okay, who's also, by the way, from Massachusetts.
The incidents where he gets whipped in the mouth, that's in Massachusetts.
That is in Massachusetts.
But Leland has a similar experience down in Virginia, that I'm not mistaken. Like he gets imprisoned and there's some threats and things like that.
There are problems in there's problems everywhere where there was just non-toleration, especially of some of what they considered weren't really part of the colony in particular. Like if you were in Virginia, if you weren't Anglican, there was a problem.
Right.
And you weren't really tolerated. This is just about anywhere. Some places were better than others.
Yeah, Pennsylvania being a little bit better.
Pennsylvania. In fact, Leland praises Pennsylvania and Rhode Island.
Yeah, Rhode Island's your Baptist anyway.
That's right. And New York and even New Jersey.
Right.
Which he said was okay.
The middle colonies was where the melting pot really occurred.
Yeah.
And you ended up with the different.
He said otherwise you have to go pretty far south to get away from the colonies and to get out into the edges of the wild in order to be free.
Right.
There was no other way around that. Anyway, nonetheless, so all this is happening, prior to his taking the presidency, right? But he ends up as Secretary of State for George Washington.
Right.
And then
which he eventually resigns from because of the differences with Hamilton.
That's right. So there you already see the political shift in route. And then he ends up as vice president
for John Adams.
Under John Adams.
Because he ran against him in the old system.
That's right.
Second place guy gets the position.
That's right.
So
runs against the president as vice president and wins. So Adams, he said, didn't attend his inauguration.
Yeah.
He left town and left the judge's commissions on his desk. Not delivered, undelivered. So when Jefferson is sworn in, it's a very nondescript kind of thing. He wasn't into pomp and circumstance, which we already knew because he argued against that during Washington's administration.
He gave a brief speech. In it, he says, "We are all Democrats. We are all Republicans. We're all Federalists. We're all Republicans."
That's right.
And the idea being that
it's one of unity.
Yeah, he's trying to pull us away from that factional partyism. And the Federalist Party was already on the way out due to the Alien and Sedition Acts and the Quasi-War and all those things.
Yeah, so he's trying to pull in the people who feel disenfranchised now, that they don't have a place to go with their grievances.
Even John Adams' son, John Quincy Adams, eventually becomes a Democratic Republican.
That's right.
So
that's right. Yeah, so anyway, he takes over like that, and he's dressed very plainly, by the way. Right. It's stated that he was dressed like normal clothing. Him and friends just walked up there and did his thing.
He walked to the inauguration in
right.
Washington, yeah.
That's right. Walked.
Right. It's like a couple blocks from the hotel he was at. Just walks in.
That's right. he was a different...
Adams' reason for leaving, that's an interesting point. the mudslinging in the campaign had gotten kind of rough.
Yeah.
And the two were actually, a lot of people don't realize this. Jefferson and Hamilton, yes, they're enemies. Jefferson and Adams, no, they're actually friends.
Yeah.
They just disagree on a few points of politics.
That's right.
So,
but at this point, they sort of got cut off from each other.
Yeah, it's like 10-year gap where they stopped writing.
And they stopped conversing with one another.
They're sort of angry over what happened with the election. I mean, it was hurtful. So.
That's right. Yeah, they're calling. It's not. It's like name calling.
Yeah,
severe.
I mean, Adams gets labeled a monarchist, which he's absolutely not. Yeah, it's rough.
It is rough. So
Jefferson gets called a godless atheist.
That's right.
Also not.
That's right. Yeah, that was the Federalist,
right.
battle cry essentially.
Right.
And which is why, by the way, many of these people kept their religious views private, and they thought they should be private, right. Which is what Jefferson says.
Something also to bring into this is how much the French Revolution was affecting that. The whole party system starts over that. Yeah. And to look at where France with religion at that point, it's kind of interesting. Jefferson gets labeled as being a Jacobin, being a French revolutionary.
Yeah.
They do away with their state religion like completely to the point where they actually have the Church of Reason?
Yeah.
Even right. Notre Dame, they tear down all of the iconoclast and everything that's in there.
That's right.
There's
it's a rebellion against authority in
all authority
in all forms.
Right.
Yeah.
And Jefferson was kind of not completely in love with that, but he is in line with he likes the revolution side of things.
He likes it. He likes it.
Going back to Washington with Shays' Rebellion, Jefferson would be quoted as saying, that a little blood of the I'm not going to get this completely right. Tyrants and patriots is necessary for the tree of democracy.
Something like that. Yeah, he does say it's something like that.
I'm totally butchering it, but you get the idea. Is that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing?
That's right. So Jefferson then takes office, and it ends immediately in turmoil because it starts immediately in turmoil, rather, because Marbury doesn't get his commission.
Got to deal with the midnight judges, so you get the most major Supreme Court case ever.
That's right.
Marbury versus Madison creates what the court is today. I mean, there's no way
judicial
around
review. It starts judicial review. So, because I felt John Marshall ends up getting it both ways.
Right.
Like he figures out a middle. The guy is intelligent.
Right.
He really is.
Well, he was actually one of Adams's aides towards the end there, before he gets the appointment to Chief Justice.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he held both offices at the same time.
He even was involved in making a couple of those treaties that the final treaty with France, he's kind of overseeing that.
That's right. Well, yeah, Marshall ends up deciding basically that part of the Judicial Act was unconstitutional.
The very act that gave him his job.
Yes.
That's right.
But
the idea that the court could issue a writ of mandamus.
And it should.
It should, but it's not constitutional. They don't have the power.
They don't have the power because, by the law, he was saying Marbury should have the right to have
a should have a remedy.
They should have a remedy by the law.
To force Jefferson to deliver
That's right.
Or Madison to deliver the papers.
That's right. So we should give him writ of mandamus to force Madison to deliver to Marbury the commission.
Right.
And they said, we agree with that.
Yep. The first 2 points were agreed with. The third one was not.
The problem is the law that the Judicial Act itself, Article 13 of it, is not constitutional. And therefore, we can't do it. Right. But we can determine that this law is unconstitutional. And that whole judicial review thing sets the stage for what the court would be, which is what we know the Supreme Court to be now, in a sense that
it's their oversight.
Yes.
It's their main check and balance over the other two.
And the idea was that the Constitution itself was a body of law.
Right.
Because there were many people thinking at the time that the Constitution was setting out a sort of ideals and principles, almost like the way that the Declaration of Independence was. And that you could just create whatever law you wanted to, kind of holding to the ideals of the Constitution.
Right. Framework.
And, yes. But Marshall said, no, this is law.
Right.
And we're reviewing this new law,
in light
and
of
it doesn't agree with that law.
Right.
Therefore, this thing is unconstitutional. So he got to have it both ways.
Right.
Because Marbury he agrees with Marbury,
right.
But I'm sorry, I can't do it because
Constitution doesn't grant me
the Constitution doesn't grant me that power.
Right.
So anyway, it expands the role, I think, of he challenged that the Judicial Act expanded the role of the Supreme Court. Therefore, it was unconstitutional. Therefore, I'm going to expand the role of the Supreme Court.
Congress does not have the power to do that. It has the power to create inferior courts.
That's right.
That's what the Constitution would literally say.
That's right.
Right.
So it establishes itself as this third wheel of the government.
And judicial
supposed to
review
have checks and balances.
Present, it just had not been used, and he's going to make use of that. And he kind of lectures Jefferson on that, and Jefferson does not like that.
No, he doesn't. So he gets to it as if Thomas Jefferson doesn't know what's in the Constitution.
Didn't you say they were related?
They were.
Yeah.
They're like second cousins, I think.
Yeah, we're talking about Jefferson and Adam, not Jefferson and
John Marshall.
Yeah, they're related, and
yeah, it's kind of a funny thing. Yeah, he gets to have it his way and have that power that he wanted, and at the same time not do anything.
Right.
And also anger Thomas Jefferson,
right,
which is perfect for him. So it all works really well for Marshall, right? And then he stays on the court, like I said, for 34 years, and so he establishes this precedent of judicial review and of the role of the court in the U.S. government.
Yeah, outside of Earl Warren in modern times, he's probably the most well-known.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's right.
I mean, you got some others, Oliver Wendell Holmes, some guys like that, but he's the one. Like, people know who John Marshall is.
That's right. That's right. So we start moving along, you would think, within the Jefferson administration because of Marbury versus Madison, but we really don't. We're bogged down in multiple things at one time, really. This thing, Marbury versus Madison, and also Jefferson decides that this Treaty of Tripoli that we had entered into is unacceptable.
Right.
And we should not have to pay tribute to some foreign leader.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense. So we're not paying it, basically. So the thing that Adams had agreed to, he says, I don't agree with it, right? And we talked about Treaty of Tripoli before, and this whole thing is certain lines in it and all that. Well, it gets squashed essentially immediately. And in fact,
which is within the president's power. I mean,
sure,
he makes the treaties, and so if we're not going to follow it, we're going to arrange something different.
Yeah,
that's kind of his gig.
But it ends up leading to another war, right?
Right.
And so
a war that we actually get some accolades from, though.
We do. We do, and we create things that are still around to today.
Right.
But he has this this notion of that I'm not going to pay a tribute before he even gets in office, because when he's in the Adams administration, he doesn't agree with the treaty. He's already opposed to the thing before Adams ever signs it. And Adams claims that he doesn't really agree with it either, but he has to. He's forced to. There's no other choice here.
Right.
I have to sign this treaty.
Jefferson was kind of unhappy with Adams about his choice of the cabinet, because the cabinet was still a leftover from Washington.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was Hamilton's people. And so
that's right.
Adams eventually realizes the error of that, but too late to kind of save Jefferson, if you will.
That's right.
Well,
so earlier, when the negotiations for the first treaty were starting, Jefferson travels to London to meet with the representatives of Pash, who was over Tripoli.
The Pasha of Tripoli,
yeah. And he meets with them, and when he's there, he's like, why do these people want to attack us? He asks the ambassador this question, the ambassador to Tripoli. And the ambassador said, well, if I looked in their holy book, in the Quran, it says that Anybody who doesn't believe their doctrines are sinners. Therefore, they're able to capture, enslave, or steal them if they want from them if they want to. And so Jefferson immediately says, "Well, then there's no point in paying these people. There's no point in doing that, you know." And so when he gets to the point where he's actually in charge, he decides, "I'm not going to pay them." You know, he doesn't pay them, and we lead to more Barbary War, right?
Right. Which we got to bring out an interesting point on Jefferson with. So Jefferson, small government, opposed to a standing military to most degrees.
That's right.
Adams had created the U.S. Army. He created the U.S. Navy. Now, Adams was kind of unhappy with Hamilton, so he had reduced the standing army, but the Navy he'd left in place.
Yeah.
And Jefferson, when he gets into office, his initial plan is, of course, cut the army down to, I think it's 2 companies.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
It's pretty small.
But to maintain all of the frigates.
Yeah, and in fact, he sends some right away before he even knows what's going to happen with this treaty.
Constitution, if I'm not mistaken, goes.
Yeah, and then isn't it the Philadelphia that gets captured later?
And there's a whole incident where the Marines are storming that, and retaking it, setting it on fire, so that they can't keep it. It's an epic story.
That's right. Yeah, so there's a lot going on that we really don't have time to get into with all that. Other than, but it's very interesting.
So Jefferson using the Navy, though, is what I was wanting to get into, and the Marine Corps.
That's right. He creates it.
Create a covert operation, if you will.
He creates the Marine Corps,
right?
Essentially. So, and they.
Well, John Adams gets credit.
He does, but so and then it's this hodgepodge group of people, really, because you end up with a guy who calls himself general, but he's not really a general,
right?
From the U.S. Army, along with a captain in the Marine Corps,
right,
who are in Alexandria, Egypt, who get 500 mercenary soldiers who are Greeks and Cretans and all from all over the Mediterranean, and they take off toward Tripoli.
Kind of like the OSS or the CIA that we've been talking about.
Because what happens is that while the ships are en route, while these frigates are on their way, Pash declares war against the U.S. because they refuse to
pay the tribute.
And the way that they would declare war wasn't like what we do with a piece of paper or a vote. He went to the U.S. Embassy and cut down the flagpole.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like a statement.
Like, cut the flagpole down, which is why of what happens at the end is why what happens at the end. It's why it's in the Marine Corps song. So
they raise the flag and
they do
to the shores of Tripoli.
That's right. So they make it to Tripoli, get there, and it's the first time a U.S. flag is planted on foreign soil somewhere.
Right.
And so it is planted in the soil there. Like, we won this thing, kind of, but not really. But
it's interesting too to talk about who the Pasha is. He's kind of like. He's several things wrapped into one. He's a leader, he's a king, he's a sultan.
That's right.
He's also a pirate.
That's right. That's right. And the big deal about the pirates, so people don't know, so they're capturing people and selling them into slavery.
Right.
I mean,
they're the source of the slave trade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really a center of organized crime.
Yep.
That's it. It's no different than that, and say you have to pay me so that I don't rob you. Basically, that's what the tribute was about.
Arguably, that was still going on all the way to Gaddafi.
Oh, I don't doubt that. and it's almost like Jefferson did the whole "we don't negotiate with terrorists" thing.
Right.
Like it's almost like he starts that in a sense. I'm not paying that. Like, these people have an ideal about them and the way that they're wanting to attack us. That proves that money won't stop it. Eventually, they'll do what they want to do anyway.
Right.
And in fact, that's what they were doing as soon as he didn't pay tribute. But eventually, this whole thing gets wrapped up, and because they want to do a prisoner exchange, sort of at the end, right after the USS Philadelphia gets burnt and everything else. That's a crazy stuff that happens there. But I think we had 89 prisoners or something like that. But because of the difference in the number of people that we were exchanging with one another, they wanted us to pay money to even it out.
Right.
Which we did.
It's like one last tribute kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like one thing, and then okay, fine, we'll pay it. and they think it's solved. It isn't. The 1815 again. It's
bring it up again.
It's back again.
Is that during the time of Monroe we get
yes.
the third Tripoli
That's right.
War?
That's right. 1815.
Now it is finally settled by that.
You get the War of 1812 and then the third Tripoli War.
Yeah, we lay the smack down.
That's right. But this whole event does say we get, as you said earlier, accolades from other nations saying, wait a minute, these people can wage a war on foreign soil, not even on their own continent. That's not just in defense.
Right.
This is something that they're actually actively doing,
even
somewhere.
Covertly to some degree, right?
Like that's right. Yeah. That's right. So anyway, that's an interesting element. But Jefferson, so think about this now. Jefferson is dealing with all this at once. You've got the Marbury versus Madison, Tripoli War is happening. And then there's other things happening on the domestic front at the same time too, you know?
Yeah, I think with Jefferson foreign policy, he had a different view of how that should go down.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, the things that he had to deal with, just like John Adams, it's thrust upon him. Mm-hmm. He's got to do what he's got to do.
Yeah.
And he even violates his own principles to make it happen.
That's right.
You know.
That's right. So a year in, by the way, when all this is still going on, Leland is still involved with the president. Okay. In fact, New Year's Day, 1802.
Okay.
A mammoth cheese.
Giant wheel.
The giant wheel called Mammoth cheese from Cheshire, Massachusetts. It's being sent to Thomas Jefferson. And the man to deliver it, John Leland, the Baptist preacher. And people started calling him the Mammoth Preacher because of the mammoth cheese.
Right.
And he leaves Massachusetts, and he doesn't go straight there with this cheese. He goes on a preaching circuit on his way.
Right.
But the preaching that he does is all about religious liberty, almost in its entirety.
Right.
He arrives in D.C., right? He arrives there in Washington, and when he gets there, he's invited, after giving the cheese, not only to be present there with them, but to preach to all Congress and to the president, which he did. And it was also another statement on religious freedom. That was what he preached about, the necessity of having religious freedom and why it's important in a civil government to have this, you know. And then he returned back to Cheshire and preached a different circuit on the way home. So preached all the way there, preached there, and then preached his way back. But the same message the entire time.
Yeah.
And so he ends up back, like as I said earlier, back in Massachusetts after the ratification of the Constitution, the accepting of the First Amendment. That's when he finally makes his way back. I think he feels like he can go home.
Now, their state government church does not go away right away.
That's right.
But the trappings
it's
of
the last one to go away in the
punishing people.
That goes away. That goes away.
Right.
So they are still funding it, and it is more like what I think it is Adams that said it, but I think it is more in line with. It's harder to change the course of the solar system than it is to remove this church tax from Massachusetts, and it does. It takes a long time for that to go away. Right. It's another 50 years after this event.
Part of that is probably because Massachusetts has the oldest standing constitution.
It may be.
And so that probably makes it a little bit difficult to
amend it and stuff. Yeah, they had to change it and do all that, and you got to get everybody on board. And then also in Massachusetts, you still have, at that time, a very strong contingent of congregational churches who did not agree with that. They wanted to enforce religious law.
They still believe in the city on the hill.
That's right. And that was going away, but it took some time for that to happen, for it to erode. A couple of generations, really.
Right.
And so now we're even further removed from the Puritans. It's almost 200 years from the Puritans until they finally remove that state role that was set off to the side for religious issues.
Well, so what a lot of people probably don't understand is that you have an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that gives you religious freedom,
Mm-hmm.
and Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, it said nothing about the states.
That's right.
And so, with that in mind, and Southerners kind of have that states' rights view, Jefferson included in that.
Mm-hmm.
It was up to the individual states to have their own kind of Bill of Rights, if you will.
That's right.
That's why Virginia, and Jefferson passing the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, is why Virginia gets rid of it quicker than Massachusetts, because
which Jefferson thinks should be happening everywhere.
It should happen in every state.
That's right.
But he didn't want the federal government to force them in that way. So I mean, that's part of all of that.
And I think it's partly due to what's going to happen with slavery too, or what he does not do.
That is the reason why the Southern ideal of states' rights gets lost, because they pinned it on slavery.
Yeah.
They probably weren't wrong about, hey, the states should have some say on certain things, but they picked the wrong horse to ride.
That's right. That's right.
Anyway, but that's Jefferson. That starts with him. That's
right.
He fights the Alien Sedition Acts in the states, not the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
Probably because they had a bad taste from Marbury.
Yeah. Oh, I don't doubt that.
Yeah.
So you've got big Supreme Court stuff, the Barbary Wars, all these other things happening, and then we end up with another giant thing happen.
1803.
1803.
Court Napoleon and gets the massive land deal that no one's ever had.
Yeah. So he sends, I can't remember who he sends now to negotiate this deal.
Livingston and Monroe.
Livingston and Monroe, that's who it is. So
Madison is on this end as a Secretary of State.
That's right. Go figure this thing out, see if we can buy this thing, because we bet we can. Why? Because what's going on with Napoleon?
So, you probably wanted to bring that up, is Napoleon had plans for Louisiana, just like he had plans for Europe.
Mm-hmm.
He would like to have seen the French reestablish their North American empire.
Mm-hmm.
And his staging ground, if you were, was the colony of Saint-Domingue.
Mm-hmm.
Later becomes Haiti.
That's right.
And there's a revolt that takes place there.
That's right. 1803 is a revolt.
First ever freed slave republic.
That's right.
That occurs in that place.
Yeah, in fact, he wants to. Jefferson wants to be neutral,
right,
on this whole issue of what's going on with France, and so because of that neutrality, he didn't want to help anybody, he didn't want to do anything. This slave revolt ends up armed, and they end up armed, and they beat the French, and they take over. This is our place now, right? So now that that's gone,
and I'm pretty sure we recognize it fairly quickly.
We do.
Right.
Sure. I mean, why wouldn't we, right? So we do that. And then now you've got this giant piece of property that is literally the size of what we're already on in the colonies.
And he needs money to fight the wars in Europe.
He does.
So
they're like, I bet we could get this thing. So, go offer him $10 million.
They were instructed to offer up to $12 million for the Isle of Orleans.
That's right.
Meaning New Orleans and basically West Florida is what they were looking to gain.
Yeah.
And they get so much more out of the deal, right?
Yeah. They double the size of this new nation.
Right.
For what, $15 million?
$15 million. Roughly 3 to 4 cents an acre.
Yeah. And by the way, we're
sitting in it right now.
We are. It is the largest area of fertile soil, the largest tract of fertile soil ever sold.
Right.
Period. And it's that. And he didn't even know that it works. In fact, he doesn't know for like almost a month, isn't it? Or it's about a month before he even figures out that.
Yeah, there's a lot of like communiques going back and forth, and
it's like April, and he doesn't know about it until July or something like that.
Local mail was pretty quick, but across the ocean stuff was.
This was weeks to get here.
Yeah.
So once you passed the colonies, it was all what was going to happen.
Well, and then down in Louisiana, where you're changing hands, that was always kind of sluggish.
That's right.
I mean, like even the when the Spanish took over from the French, it took the governor 4 years before he showed up.
Yeah,
They had an immediate the Creole revolt. It was immediate.
Yeah,
like, it's pretty wild.
That is.
That's a rabbit trail for another time.
But so he's got this giant chunk of property now, all fertile property, which he I mean, if he would have known like how far, because he didn't really know what was up. He'd never been there. But if he would have known what it was,
not certain of a presidential power to purchase land.
No, that was the other thing. In fact, he told him, like, I think I need to get Congress's approval to make this deal. I think Congress has to approve a land deal. There's no way I can do that. But then he figures out what kind of property it is. Wait a minute. This is real fertile soil.
Strategic importance also.
And we got this port.
Get France off our back door.
Rivers all the way up. We're not sure what France is going to be doing over here anyway.
Right.
Kind of worried about that. Especially after the previous administration, the Adams administration, the Alien Sedition Act, and the weirdness with France.
Well, and technically France is a monarchy again.
That's right.
Technically.
Which he didn't like.
Right.
So, I mean, he's still friends with the Marquis, but nevertheless, there's an issue here. So he ends up getting all this property, right? Realizes what it is and says, "Forget about Congress. We want this deal to go through," right? And and he makes the deal happen.
Right.
They end up with the Louisiana Purchase. So Mississippi River all the way up through Minnesota.
Well, you do eventually get Senate approval on the treaty, and
sure,
he uses the treaty-making power to make it happen.
That's right.
And arguably, that would be the Jefferson way to do it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. He negotiated the deal, got it done. Senate approved it. Here we go. It's our property.
From Hamilton over it.
Sure, that's right. But so that's a huge deal, right? And so now we've doubled the size of the U.S. But what do we do now?
Right.
What's Jefferson to do about this?
Well, he sends out explorers, and everybody knows about Lewis and Clark, but there's more than that. He sends out Zebulon Pike, and just an anecdotal thing. Zebulon Pike actually brings him back. I have a book on presidential pets, kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Brings Jefferson back 2 grizzly bear cubs.
Yeah, that's something.
And they kind of go wild in Washington and wreck some things. So,
well, there was another thing that because we know Lewis and Clark, right? They're out there mapping and figuring out what kind of property you have, but that's not the only thing they're out there for. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes too.
Well, they are military officers.
They are.
There is that.
So they're supposed to assess the religious views of the natives that they encounter. What do they know about a supreme being? What do they think is in charge of the universe? How does this work? Like, they want to know very specific philosophical questions that they're given that as a mandate to figure that out.
Right.
Why? Why are they given that as a mandate? Well, Jefferson has been talking to various missionaries, which is another interesting connection for him, right? But he's talking to various missionaries. He already signed into law then the I forgot the name of the act, but it created a society for the conversion of the native population. Okay, so his understanding that the principles of Jesus were
Department of the Interior. That doesn't come about till Quincy Adams, right?
Yeah, that's later.
Okay.
Yeah, that's later.
Yeah.
But these missionary guys are in his ear, and it's not one group. So we normally think about it as like, it's this one religious group or something, or one zealot or whatever. No, it's all these different religious groups, and so he's talking to all of them. He doesn't care who they are.
Right.
In fact, he writes a letter to a monastery in South Louisiana because a nun wrote him a letter about what he was going to do, what his plans were for religion and all this other stuff. And he assures her she will continue to instruct the little ones and all that. And he even quotes Proverbs, train up a child in the way he should go. Right? And in talking to this nun, he gives money to the governor of Louisiana to build a church, personal money, not from Congress. Give him $50 to help with which $50 in those days, that's a pretty good chunk of change.
Right.
But he's got all these different missionaries that are wanting to go west, right? And to encounter the Native Americans. Why is he on board with that in all this? So what is the
So I'm
the
thinking you're
role.
probably heading down the idea of the assimilation that's going to occur, or the attempt at that.
I think that's what he's trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, I would think trying to Americanize the Native Americans, if you will.
Yeah,
Um,
that's my thoughts on that.
probably. I think Jefferson is a lot like Washington in the way he views that. In that he sees the settlement of the land. Now he wants the land. Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah,
but he sees the settlement of it as inevitable.
mm-hmm.
Like we're not quite to manifest destiny yet, but
Yeah,
the idea is there.
yeah. Well, I mean, Jefferson paves the way for it, right?
Yeah,
Louisiana Purchase, and then everything that's coming after this.
He definitely brings that.
He wants an agrarian society. He loves it, that idea, right? And now there will be people that are be getting information back. So these missionaries want that information. That's why he gives instructions to Lewis and Clark to find that information out.
Right.
We want to know what they believe and everything
similar
about.
To the way our census works, where the census is actually not tied to the higher level state bureaus. It's part of the Commerce Department.
Right. That's
and,
right.
The whole point about it is they ask you might get a long form census questionnaire, which asks you how many peach trees you have in your backyard, things like that. It's that kind of demographic that, you're looking for that kind of information. So I would think that's kind of part of that, like he wants to know for assimilation purposes, but also,
I think he thought that they could be integrated into American society.
Their view of land ownership has to have something to do with that, because tribes that view it differently are going to be harder to work with.
They are.
And
so he's trying to figure out what he's got going on. What's going on out here?
Right.
How much trouble are we going to have? These missionaries go out there. What are they going to encounter?
There's the scientific side of that too.
That's the other end of it. Well, we'll get to some of that in a minute too. But so the religious side of it, though, there's a legitimate reason for him wanting to know, right? Like you said, for military purposes. Like, so if we own this property now, if this is all ours, we just bought this property, and there are people already there.
Right.
What do they believe?
Right.
Right? Do they have a view that the devil is going to come from the east on horseback?
The Great White Devil or something?
Yeah, and we have to fight against him to death. I mean, he needs to know that before we go out there, right? And so that's the information that he needs. But that information gets funneled into missionaries who end up pushing out west and sort of paving the way for settlers to move into those regions. And this area is hostile or not. Well, you'll figure that out pretty quick if you've got a few missionaries that move into the area.
Right.
And they have no problem. They are able to integrate with the Native Americans, or they have some really hostile areas and they can't do that. Don't go there yet.
One of the first complaints against the king is the Proclamation of 1763. And with that in mind, that's in the Declaration. But the idea was that the king was trying to keep the Native Americans and the settlers separate, which the settlers moved west anyway.
Yeah.
You got Daniel Boone traveling into Kentucky in that area. And so that's going to play in, because that's where that view begins. Like, I'm president and I represent the people of the United States. And Washington uses that as, so these Native American groups are like foreign countries.
Yeah.
They use the treaty-making powers of the president to deal with them.
Right.
Which was not a bad thought. It was treating them properly in a way. But all the presidents that follow, including Jefferson, they continue that model.
Yeah.
And they were chafing under that proclamation. Settlers move west. Washington basically said that short of building something like the Great Wall of China, I can't stop the flow of settlers.
That's right.
Jefferson, rather than attempting to stop the flow of settlers, how can we make this work?
Yeah.
Where we don't eclipse them, but at the same time.
Well, and I think especially after the Louisiana Purchase, because now there's so much property out there.
Yeah.
And
he saw farms stretching across the continent.
He did. And the ideas that we have sort of embedded in our legal system are about the way that we deal with land.
Yep.
Right? If you leave it sit for a long time and somebody else comes in and starts using it, you don't object to that, and they basically assume ownership for a long time, it is yours.
Yeah.
And you can get that land. acquisitive prescription. It's yours now. Because evidently you didn't want, because that other guy didn't want it because he didn't do nothing with it. And so that idea is present, I think, in Jefferson's mind. Like, you especially when the people are moving west,
right.
What starts happening is that here's a piece of property, it's yours. But they move out there and they go out there to get to this place. They don't really clear much of it. They take a couple trees down, build a little house, and sit there in the woods. Well,
yeah, it's Lincoln's Homestead Act. Lincoln passes at 62.
Yeah.
You can claim up to, 250 acres?
Yeah, something like that. But the problem is new people start going out and they're able to go to these other land offices and get grants now, new grants, right? Because some of them you get out there and you're like, well, this guy didn't do anything with his property.
Yeah.
Well, if you're not doing it, I guess you don't want it. It's still full of trees. There's no, you're not growing any crops. There's no money being made off of the land. You're not tilling it. You're not doing anything to it.
Right.
So evidently you don't want it. So move on. This is mine now.
Right.
And that thing starts happening.
Yeah, that does kind of lend into the Native Americans because
it's to say they weren't doing anything to the property.
They're migratory. They're chasing whatever buffalo or whatever you're looking at.
He did not get the whole hunter-gatherer mindset.
Right, and so their view of the land is completely different. Like it's tribal and owned by the whole tribe. And
that's right. Or nobody owns it. The idea of nobody can own it.
With the treaty-making power, they have the right to parcel it out.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, it's such a confusing thing. But they anyway, people are moving west, and he has this idea that that's the way it should go. And he thinks he's just stumbled upon the best thing that has ever happened. What's funny, you were talking about earlier with the Navy, he's using the Navy. Well, after this war ends, he reduces the size almost immediately again. And then he
starts...
Not
as token of the Army, but...
No, not as much as the Army.
Because he realizes the trade value.
He does. Because he wants to protect trade routes and such. But he doesn't see the Atlantic as the real trade area.
No, you're right. There's other places.
There's other places, and we need to go west.
Yep.
We're gonna.
It's the same old.
Well, people are talking about.
We've been looking for the Northwest Passage.
Why are we fighting? Yeah. Why are we fighting wars in the old world?
Right.
We live in the new world, and so let's do stuff.
And we're looking for the way to get to the spices and the silk, just like they've been doing forever.
That's right. So he sees this new plan. Let's just shift the energies, and so he also inherits. I think it's like the U.S. government owed it was like $85 million in debt in that day, and he thinks this is too much money. He starts cutting agencies.
Yeah, he cuts the debt at the same time as buying Louisiana.
Yes,
it's amazing.
How does he do it? So he buys Louisiana.
Well, you're right. He fires everybody.
He does. So he's got $85 million at the beginning of his presidency. The federal government owed $85 million.
Yeah.
At the end of his presidency, they owed $53 million.
He literally fired the tax collectors.
That's right.
One of the things he did.
That's right.
Right.
So it's a crazy thing, and the money that they wanted in the Barbary Wars for the tribute and all was like $225,000. They wanted that initially from him, in addition to the normal tribute. And the reason they wanted that was because he's a new leader, and so new leaders essentially have to be taught a lesson, like it's you owe me, and that puts us, where I'm on top.
Even it up, yeah.
Just so Adams isn't in power anymore. Oh, well, you owe me money now. And so he has to pay that. He wanted to pay this, and that's the thing he refuses to pay. Right. It's not, he doesn't want to pay the tribute either, but he doesn't pay the entry fee as a new leader. Right. And at the time, the entire U.S. economy added together was $10 million a year. All of everything, period.
Right.
The entire economy was $10 million a year. And they wanted him to pay $225,000 just as the leader, which is a huge amount of money. And we're in debt. We don't want to pay that. So anyway, he reduces the debt by a third, and doubles the landmass of the territory.
Right.
And he is thinking, this is great. And they'd come up with a plan to completely eliminate the debt within 16 years. There'd be no debt owed by the federal government. That was what the trajectory was at the moment.
Well, we apparently did it at some point because we were paid up.
That's right. Yeah, and he, like I said, figured out a third of the way there, and the Louisiana Purchase actually helped to make that thing happen. I think after because of the expansion of the property,
Right.
all the
Well,
stuff
you
you
get
could
New
grow,
Orleans. I mean, you
and
get
New
New
Orleans, the
Orleans.
port.
The port is going to make the money back immediately.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Anyway, so all right, guys, we're going to need to go to a two-parter here, and so we're going to end this one, and we're going to the second part next week.